Glad Sunday morning, boys and girls. My name is Nanny Rosebud, and I tell stories. And today I'm going to tell you some stories from the Bible. Have you ever wondered why people gather together on Sundays to go to church and read the Bible? Well, that is because many years ago, when Jesus the Christ died on the cross and was buried in a tomb, he resurrected or rose from the dead and came alive again on the third day, and that day was a Sunday. And all of his believers and followers, his friends that loved him, they gathered together on that Sunday. And ever since then, people who follow Jesus the Christ and call themselves Christians have gathered together on Sundays to remember that first resurrection day. We call that day, Resurrection Day, Easter, and we celebrate it one time a year, Easter. But when you go to church on a Sunday and you study about Jesus the Christ and you read from the Bible, you are remembering Easter Sunday every Sunday, because for the Christian who follows Jesus, every Sunday is Easter. Well, this morning we're going to look at one verse, and this verse is from the New Testament. That's the second part of the Bible. The Old Testament tells about the world from the beginning of time until the time that Jesus came to earth. And the second part, the New Testament, tells about the world from the time Jesus came to earth until he left the earth and afterwards, and promises to return again. It tells about all of the things that will happen when he returns again. Well, the verse that we're looking at today for our lesson for Sunday school is from the book of John. The book of John is the fourth book: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It was written by Jesus' friend John, who was one of his followers, and he loved him very much. John wrote this book, and that's where we find the verse in the third chapter, 1, 2, 3. The 16th verse is the one we're going to look at today. So the reference or the address for the verse is John 3:16. For the book of John, the chapter 3, and the verse that's numbered 16. So John 3:16. You might already know that verse by heart. Many people do. So if you do, say it with me. We're going to say the address first and the address last, and we'll say the words together. Ready? John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. Very good. Now, have you ever wondered what that verse means? Well, let's look at the first words of the verse. For God. Now, who is God? If you go to Sunday school on Sundays, you might know something about God. Do you know that God is a spirit and he doesn't have a body? Do you know that God made the world and all things in it? Do you know that God lives forever? That he's eternal? That means he never had a beginning and he never had an ending, just like a circle, no start and no stop. We can learn who God is by looking in the Bible. In the Old Testament that tells about the beginning of the world until Jesus came, the very first book in the Old Testament is called Genesis. That means the beginning. And the very first book, Genesis, in the very first chapter of that book and the very first verse, it tells us, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So we know from the Bible, from the very first words in the Bible, that God is the creator who created the heaven and the earth. It goes on to tell the story how God created everything. And later in the Bible, it says, God made everything, and without him, nothing was made that is. So everything that is, God made. God is the creator. He's the master of the universe. So we can say John 3:16, let's say the first words, for God so loved. So we can say the master of the universe so loved. When we think about love, we think about hearts. I love hearts. I especially love Valentine's Day. I celebrate my birthday on Valentine's Day, and I love hearts. This is a red heart. If you turn it in the light, you can see that it's red in different shades of red. I also like pink hearts because pink is my favorite color. We use hearts to remind us of love. For God, the master of the universe, so loved the world. The world. Now, you might think that the world here that John spoke of is the earth that God created. Well, God did create the world. He created the earth. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The master of the universe did create the world, but he also created all things in it, the trees, the plants, the animals, and the man and the woman. God created everything in the world, and the man and the woman are the people in the world. And here, when John says, for the master of the universe so loved the world, he means, for the master of the universe so loved the people of the world. So instead of the world, we could put a name, because I am one of the people of the world, you are one of the people of the world, so we could put my name in there, we could put your name in there. I could say, for God so loved Nanny Rosebud, and you could say, for God so loved, and say your name. So let's say it. I'm going to pause after I say, for God so loved, so you can say your name. So say it with me. John 3:16, for God so loved. Very good. For God so loved you and me and all the people of the world. For the master of the universe so loved all of the people in the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Do you know what only begotten means? It means the only Son God had. That would mean the only one he became a father to. But we all call God our Father if we love him, and we call ourselves his children. But he adopted us. He had one Son, his only begotten Son. He was not adopted. He was born to God the Father. We are adopted by God the Father if we love him and we choose him to be our Father. So, who is the only begotten Son? That's Jesus, the Christ, the one that the Christians followed so many years ago, the one who was crucified on the cross and was buried in a tomb, but rose from the dead and came alive again 3 days later on the very first Easter Sunday. Jesus the Christ. So we could say the master of the universe so loved the people of the world that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus the Christ, that whosoever believes in him, Jesus the Christ, should not perish, but have everlasting life. What does perish mean? Well, remember we said in the beginning that God was a spirit, and God is eternal and lives forever and has no beginning and no ending. He doesn't have a physical body, but he made man and woman with a physical body. Our physical body dies. Our physical body doesn't live forever, but it says in the Bible that God made man and woman in his own image. He made them in his own image. He made them like himself. So God doesn't have a body, but he gave us a body. But he made us in his image. Well, God is a spirit. He gave us a spirit, and he gave us a soul. And our souls were created to live forever, just like God. But our body dies. So, if our body dies, what happens to our soul? Our soul lives forever because our soul is eternal. But where does our soul live forever? God says he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish. Perish isn't talking about the physical body, it's talking about your soul. And perish means your soul won't get to be with God. Perishing means your soul doesn't get to be with God. For God, the master of the universe, so loved the people of the world that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus the Christ, that whosoever believes in Jesus should not have their soul perish, but have everlasting life when their body dies. So perish means you don't get to live with God. Your soul will live forever, but it won't get to live with God. To have everlasting life means your soul gets to live forever with God. So let's look at that verse again. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So the master of the universe loved the people of the world so much that he gave his only Son, Jesus the Christ, that whoever believes in Jesus the Christ will not have their soul perish away from God, but their soul will live forever with God. And that's in John 3:16. So now you might ask, well, why does our body die? And that goes back to the very beginning, in the book of Genesis, in the beginning. And next Sunday, we're going to learn more about the beginning and why it is when God created us to live forever, now our bodies die. But the important lesson for today to remember is that God so loved the world, all the people of the world, including you, that he gave his only Son, Jesus the Christ, that if we believe in him, Jesus, our souls will not perish and live away from God forever when our body dies, but our soul will live forever with God in heaven, with God forever. And that comes from John 3:16. Say it together with me again. The book of John, chapter 3, verse 16. Ready? Say the address first and last. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. John 3:16. Have a glad Sunday, boys and girls.